I'm Mindy.
And I'm Rachel.
And welcome to Needles and Nerds.
Right before this 4th of July, this one comes to me and says,
I need a new dress.
Of course it's colonial time period because we're doing it for the 4th of July. And we have 2 days to do it.
But what did we do, Rachel? Do you know what we did?
We did it. But we learned a lot while we were doing it because we had never made a dress quite that fast. And we wanted to share a lot of that knowledge with you.
So one of the things when I got into costuming that everyone says is like, oh, it's so expensive. Creating this historically inspired dress wasn't that expensive. Altogether, the dress cost me like 60 bucks.
And there are other places where you can get fabric even cheaper.
You have a bad pattern that's going to result in you having to make a lot of edits to it.
We had a bodice pattern for this project, and the biggest issue we found was with the sleeves.
So the sleeves were made, what was that, a size 10, a size 12?
About a size 10.
I'm a size 16. It fit me perfectly.
Which was fine for this situation.
Oh yeah, it was great for me.
But not so good for the fact that we bought it for a size 10.
10.
We had made dresses before where I did just completely create my own sleeve pattern because the sleeve pattern didn't work. Unfortunately, sometimes you can only know if it's a good pattern or not once you've worked with it.
Sometimes less is more. So in the past, I've made dresses with 6 to 7 yards of fabric in the dresses, in the skirt part of the dress. Because you've done it before, and it looked great on her. So what's good for the goose is good for the gander. It looked bulky. I hesitate to say fat, but it looked bulky. This time, we were doing it in 48 hours, and I didn't want to spend a ton of money, so I went on the lower end of what I would allow in skirt size. Turns out, on a plus size body, that drapes better. So, tailor the dress to your size. If you're a bigger person, you might not need as much volume to fill out a shape.
A shortcut that we found for this garment was this hook and eye tape, basically. I don't know if you can really see it well, but these are hooks and these are eyes, and as opposed to hand stitching them individually onto the garment, you can just stitch down the whole tape and you're good to go. I didn't do it perfectly on this since it was my first time and I learned a lot from it, but on the whole, it did actually save us a whole lot of time.
So when sewing, sometimes it goes a lot faster if you just have a faster machine. What does that mean? I'm on a very cheap machine because I've only started sewing recently. My machine doesn't go very fast. And then I used her machine, which, as we've established, has speed settings. And all of a sudden, I am hemming skirts in literally half the time. So if you're having to do a dress in a crunch, make sure you have the tools to do it.
Also, a point we do want to highlight is that just because this dress specifically didn't take us a lot of time, that didn't mean as a whole it didn't take us a lot of time, because we built a lot of the foundational garments.
Yeah. And
foundational garments are vitally necessary for both the silhouette and the look and the structure of the dress.
I could not foresee myself working as hard on these days, getting them done any sooner than a week. But the good thing is, if you put in the time and effort to make a good pair of undergarments that fit you, you can then go and make a full dress in 48 hours.
We also learned a lot about shortcuts and which ones to take
and which ones not to take.
Do skip ironing when possible. Sometimes, depending on the fabric you're working with or what area of the pattern you're working on, you may definitely need to iron. But in my experience, ironing does slow down the process a significant amount of time, and overall, if you're just trying to throw something together quickly, is not necessary for it to look good in the end for a finished product.
Ignore things that you make that seem slightly uneven, because they may not actually be noticeable. Example, my sleeves have a gathering line on them to create this little ruffle on the top. Insert picture here. I should have pinned it better so the gathers sit in slightly different places. Unless I told you, or unless you knew to look for it, you wouldn't notice it. When pinning a garment, you can decrease your pin usage on straight lines. What do I mean by this? I have a habit of underpinning. To compensate, I now have a habit of overpinning. I was pinning the hem on a dress. It's like a 3-yard dress. I had about pins every 2 inches. That's not necessary. Taking them out to keep sewing slows you down. Putting them in the first place slows you down. If you're pinning something that's long and straight, it'll hold.
Adjust your seam allowance to something that's easier for you to follow. A traditional seam allowance is 5/8 of an inch. For me, on my machine, I tend to find that it's a little bit more difficult for me and a little bit more time consuming for me to make sure I'm measuring it up on the 5/8 of an inch line, and then that I don't deviate from that. And when you're going for speed and you still want to have that precision or a straight line, just adjusting it slightly to 4/8 or 1/2 of an inch that's exactly the measurement to the edge of my foot on the machine. And that is way easier for me to spot and to keep track of and to make sure it's lined up while going quickly.
Pre-washing your fabric before you sew with it.
So normally you wash your fabric to pre-shrink it. So then when you wash it later, it won't warp and change size because fabric, surprise, can shrink in the wash.
Look, if you bought that fabric and the dress needs to be done in 2 days, and you know it's going to be in that machine for like 2-3 hours, do you really need to wash it?
No.
No.
You will make severe mistakes. What I've come to learn is oftentimes there is a quick fix for it as opposed to redoing it. The best example I have for this is when you're gathering your stitches. A lot of times my gathering stitches will pop, and so I'll often just bunch it together while I'm stitching it under the machine and just pretend like it didn't happen. It doesn't look as good, but when it's a 5-yard skirt, you're not really seeing a lot of the fabric bunched up and seeing it look weird, especially when it's in motion. The quick fix often works better when you're going for speed.
Utilize the selvage of your fabric. It's a finished edge, and you know what that means? It means you don't need to finish the edge yourself.
Oftentimes this is most useful when you're going for hems because then you don't have to flip the hem over twice. All of this is a really good example of what I like to call don't be a perfectionist, which is more for myself more than anyone. There tends to be a 5-foot rule for conventions and things where if you can see it from 5 feet away and it looks fine, then more than likely it's fine. Don't skip cutting your corners or clipping your curves.
Don't go too fast when you're top stitching. I know we've just said, oh, you can go fast on like hems. Don't go fast on top stitching on anything that's going to be visible. Make the line straight, curve, whatever it needs to be. Take the time and make it look good. When working with boning, never skip filing your boning. Always file your boning.
Additional tips that take breaks, please. Don't overwork yourself. Eat.
Don't skip meals.
Don't skip meals. It's very easy to get caught up into the project you're working on that you're making a lot of progress on. Please eat. Drink water, hydrate.
Hydrate.
It's very easy to forget to do that as well. So just make sure you're taking care of yourself while you're going through this process.
This is the most important tip. There's a time, there's a point in the night. It's around 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. When your sewing machine, just listen to me, believe me, your sewing machine stops working. And it is at this point, when your sewing machine stops working, go to bed. Wait, Rachel, what if the con I'm making this costume for is in the morning?
Go to bed and wake up at 7 the next morning. What if you think that, I mean, it was just the needle just broke and I can replace it and I can finish this seam, I can do it.
No. Go to bed.
Go
To
bed. Well, thank you for joining us for our mediocre words of wisdom from 2 amateur costumers.
who made a dress in 48 hours, which, you know, all of this to say, I don't recommend. Will I be doing this again? Oh, for sure.
Now, if you would like to join us on all of our adventures,
Subscribe, hit the little bell so you know when we upload videos.
and also we have our Instagram, Needles and Nerds.
You can see all of the crazy pictures, projects that we're doing before videos come out.
Bye!
Bye! You want to look at my nails?
Oh, wow! The creative process can be a furious beast.